For almost 34 million people in the US and Canada, hunting and fishing plays a role in their lives, and this contributes directly to putting food on the table. Conservation efforts are not just important for the species which live across our landscapes, but also for the people who sustainably harvest and rely on them as a food source. Hunting has become a controversial practice in modern times. My name is Dan Cabela, and I'm traveling the globe to explore the true impact that hunting is having on our remaining wild landscapes. This practice goes as far back as human history can remember, but does it have a place in modern conservation? One of the greatest conservation success stories in North America is the rise in white-tailed deer populations, becoming one of the most prolific deer species we have today. But it wasn't always like this. In the 1800s, much like our American bison, their populations were decimated due to commercial overharvesting. But in the years that followed, conservation efforts, largely led by hunters, helped the populations to bounce back. And today they're estimated to be over 30 million across the US. I want to learn more about this population recovery and better understand the importance of wild harvested food for people. There is no better person to learn from in this regard than my old friend Shane Mahoney, who lives in Newfoundland, Canada. For over 30 years, Shane has been at the forefront of conservation, with a focus on how we as humans interact with the other wild beings on this planet.
The island of Newfoundland, which is where I was born and where I was raised and where I live and where I'll die, is a very imposing and spectacular place. It's a harsh place, but it's also a place of extraordinary wild beauty. And from a very early age, I took a very deep interest in all wild things. And I grew up in communities where the harvest of wild living creatures was essentially the way of life. There was no alternative, so virtually all of our food was supplied to us from the natural environment. That led me into, degrees at university, an honors degree, a master's degree in ecology and animal behavior, and really ended up spending 20 to 25 years of my life, actually, spending a huge proportion of each year in the wilderness with wild creatures. I simply cannot imagine a world without wild animals.
Can you tell us a little bit about the North American model?
Canada and the United States, approximately 100 years ago, really came together in an extraordinary way to develop a shared system of policies, institutions, and laws that focused on how to enable people to harvest wildlife and to do that in a sustainable way so that the wildlife populations would always be there. So we not only generated a system that would rescue imperiled wildlife, we generated a system that would allow us for now over 100 years to harvest wildlife at massive levels, really, but in a totally sustainable way, maintain very high populations of those species, very different species, all across these two massive countries, and at the same time, to generate funding mechanisms to work for the conservation of those species and the habitats they require. Of course, people might be critical of a particular aspect of it here or there, but from where I sit, with my desire to keep wildlife with us, I say it's an irreplaceable model.
The North American model of conservation is an extraordinary success story. Approximately $2 billion per year are generated in the United States and Canada through this model, and directly through the activities of hunting. As a result, animals that would have been considered endangered 100 years ago are now flourishing across both nations. You know, Wild Harvest Initiative, this is something that you've invested a lot into this. I think it's very powerful, and I'd like to, just hear from you kind of the origins, how it was put together, and kind of how you see it going forward.
So I started to look at the patterns in society. This was a very methodical thing. It took over 18 months to bring this to fruition. One of the trends that became clear that was global was the increased emphasis that human beings were placing on health. I said, well, hunting and fishing and harvesting of mushrooms and berries and all things from the wild are providing us with the highest quality food that we know of. So that led me to the question, well, how much of this healthy wild food are we actually obtaining through the hunting programs in Canada and the United States? Now, I thought that that answer was lying on somebody's table. But to my surprise, no one had ever tried to determine the total amount of wild food that this incredible system of hunting generates each year. But that's what we set out to do, and that's what we have accomplished. And the results, of course, have been mind-blowing.
Hunting has long been an integral part of American culture. And through the Wild Harvest Initiative, Shane has set out to uncover how much of the North American diet consists of wild harvested meat and fish. The results are surprising.
What we did have as a result of the North American model, we had every provincial wildlife agency and every state wildlife agency recording every year deliberately, religiously, accurately, the number of animals of each species harvested, and they held those records, and those records were available. And what needed to be done was to take those records, figure out for every species how heavy they were on average, how big the animal was, and work out from that how much actual consumable wild meat was provided.
In 2022, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service estimated that there were over 14 million hunters over the age of 16 in America. Through his research, Shane has discovered that each hunter will share their harvest with an average of 8 people. This means that wild meat is feeding over 100 million people and accounts for over 1.6 billion meals each year. A huge percentage of this is white-tailed deer meat, which is one of the most popular animals to hunt in North America.
In the United States, just in the United States, you're harvesting close to 6 million of these animals each year. And that harvest is generating somewhere around 850 million meals. So one single species, this white-tailed deer, generates about 62% of all the wild meat that's harvested for all the 108 species that are harvested in the United States of America. It's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, very significant.
These numbers are staggering, and I wonder what the repercussions would be if hunting were to be banned in the United States.
Now, if we had to go out tomorrow and replace those 1.6 billion meals, that would cost about $2 billion to purchase the domestic meat equivalents of all of that wild harvested meat that individual hunters are acquiring and, of course, which they share with their families. That, of course, is just the economic replacement costs.
An added consideration is the impact of domestic livestock needed to replace wild harvested protein. This requires large tracts of land to be moved into agricultural production, which can be devastating for biodiversity. Globally, agriculture has been one of the primary drivers in wildlife declines.
And one of the costs that's associated with an expanding agricultural base is, of course, that wildlife habitat is taken out of production for either landscapes that the domesticated animals themselves can use, or to grow feed to feed the domestic animals that we are raising for human consumption. That loss of wildlife habitat is, of course, a major driver of wildlife loss, of what we call biodiversity loss around the globe. Every international institution that has assessed the impacts pertaining to biodiversity loss on the planet identify agriculture as one, if not the primary reason for habitat change and the loss of biodiversity. So, when you take all of these things into consideration, I felt maybe we can begin to do what the hunting community has long sought to do. It's to convince people that hunting is anything but a cruel activity. Hunting is anything but an activity that hurts conservation. It is just the opposite. It helps in the conservation of wildlife if it is properly regulated, if it is properly organized, and if it is properly monitored, all of which, of course, are aspects that are built into the North American model, the system that we have. And so the Wild Harvest Initiative idea, that's what it was, and now we stand in possession of the largest database of its kind in the world, and this is the story that Conservation Visions and the Wild Harvest Initiative and its partners who are supporting this work.
While these numbers are highly impressive, what is even more incredible is the contribution of just a single species, white-tailed deer. I want to head back into the field and see this iconic American species with new eyes. I began to really get a grasp of just how important wild food is for people, and it far exceeded what I could have imagined. What was maybe even more staggering was the impact of a single species in this story, the humble, widespread white-tailed deer. Hunting white-tailed deer has always been significant to the hunting traditions of our family. This was certainly true in my upbringing, just as it is in raising our children. And these traditions continue every fall up to the present day. I am traveling to Colorado to meet up with hunting guides Chris Wheeler and David Blake in the hopes of finding a good harvestable whitetail. This is an opportunity for me to think more about all the years I have spent hunting these deer and what it really means to the people in North America. This ranch has a huge landscape of 100,000 acres with a thriving population of wildlife. Their careful management provides 3 to 4 whitetail hunting tags a year, only harvesting mature animals that are no longer contributing to the genetic pool. They also issue permits for biologists to come and research the animals. The meat from hunting is either taken home by the hunters or donated to local communities in need. It is an extremely well-managed operation and nothing is wasted. I'm also very impressed by the quality of the animals on this ranch. Everything I have seen has been in great condition. The whitetail are most active at dawn and in the evenings, so I set out early with Chris and David to see what we can find.
The whitetails like this spot of cottonwoods here, and they usually feed out right on this edge a lot.
Yeah, so it's our first morning out here. Just barely getting started, but there's quite a bit of activity. We've seen lots of elk, quite a few mule deer, and a good bit of whitetail already. And there's a buck that we're looking at out here. Looks to be a mature buck. Pretty far out, but very beautiful morning. Great to be out here. Yeah, you can't see his body, can you?
Yeah, I can just see the top of his head from where we are right here.
Yeah, there's no shot there.
really nice deer.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Beautiful buck.
It is a beautiful buck.
As I punch my tag for the buck, I reflect on my discussion with Shane. The privilege I have to hunt this animal and harvest this meat is a direct consequence of the carefully regulated North American model of conservation, a model where active management and the use of wildlife resources sit at the core. In my early days of deer hunting, we butchered and processed our own deer. Although we still do this to some extent, we now take the largest portion to a local butcher. The buck has been processed and Chris has separated a beautiful fillet for us to barbecue for dinner. The rest of the animal is set aside to be butchered and shared with the nearby community. Sharing a well-deserved Pendleton whiskey by the fire, we reflect on our day. There is no better way to celebrate a harvest than enjoying meat over an open fire with like-minded people. All over North America, hunters are enjoying the same experience I am having in Colorado, spending time in nature with the opportunity to take food home to the family. This primal connection is in all of us. Wild meat is often consumed in our household and is a staple of our regular diet. It is a cherished food source for our entire family, as we have played a hand in securing the food. I think it is safe to say that the sharing of wild meat is an essential aspect of what it means to be a hunter. My conversation with Shane has reinforced my belief that hunters are integral to conservation. They have a deep respect for nature and the wildlife that are their source of food. This respect is passed on to anyone who shares in this harvest, helping to ensure there is an inherent incentive to respect and conserve our wild spaces and the creatures which inhabit them. I think an important thing to consider is what would the replacement cost for wild food be if we were to stop hunting and fishing? How could we replace the resource? Would it require less wild spaces that would be replaced with agricultural feedlots, pig and chicken farms? This is definitely something to think about. As a hunter, it's important to realize how special it is to harvest our own food. But there is a message there for everyone about our consumption and impact on the planet. It has become even clearer to me now that the wild harvest of food plays a critical role in both the conservation of landscapes and species alongside the well-being of people. Through the work of Shane and the Wild Harvest Initiative, we are just starting to understand how critical the food source is.